Don't think we're not suffering.
That's right.
We're suffering just the same. Dov, we're on? Thank you very much. Okay, so today's topic is a bit of a continuation. A few weeks ago, we discussed the sources for burial in the Torah. And I wanted to go into also something that very unfortunately is taking root and building some momentum in the secular Jewish community, Jewish world, and that is cremation as a viable option. So let's get an understanding of how Judaism views these different practices, and I'll be using part of a fantastic book by Doron Kornbluth, Cremation or Burial. So anyone interested in some further reading on it, excellent book. So some of the sources, let's start with how we started last time. Do you want to say something?
Pardon me?
Did you want to say something or?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So the Torah mentions burial. Okay? Where does the Torah mention burial? In Devarim, in Deuteronomy, we are taught lo talin nivlato al ha'etz ki kavor tik berenu. Right? One cannot leave a body on a pole overnight. This is a person who received capital punishment, and the body was hung up, or at least not going to Ramban's simple shop, going to Gemara, the body was hung, but it cannot be left there overnight. Ki killat Elokim talui. Because it is a blasphemy for God when there is a body that is hanging. And do not defile the land which Hashem your God gives you as an inheritance. Now, why is it that a body hanging is blasphemy of God, or kilalat elokim? It's like a curse to God. Why would that be? What is the parallel over here?
Well, it's not meant literally. Not literally. Nevertheless, we are told that we were created in the image of God.
Perfect.
And even though that's not literal, the fact that during our lifetime, we had the potential for godliness, that potential should not be on display.
Beautiful. Excellent. Right? As you very carefully worded your way there, right? Our belief, God has no corporeality, right? So there is no physical image of God, but there is a certain godliness which we resemble. Right? That's the Tselem Elokim, that's the image of God. Right? And therefore, when Rashi, I believe, brings from the Medrash that the parable of two twins, or the king had a twin, and when the twin had done some serious crime, right, they weren't allowed to hang up that twin because he was an identical twin to the king, and it would look like the king is being hung up over there. Okay. So, but in the context we see over here that rather what must be done, he must be buried. He or she actually must be buried by Yom Hahu, on that day. And the Talmud in Sanhedrin, the oral teaching, the oral law, brings, you have it both in Hebrew and in English. Amar Rav Yochanan Mishum Shim ben Yochai. Rav Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yochai, Minayin lamalin et meito. From where do we learn out that one who keeps a deceased body malin overnight, unburied, sha'over below ta'aseh, the person is going against a clear don't of the Torah. Tamaloma, the pasuk says, Ki kavor tikvarenu. Right? Don't leave it overnight. Rather, what must you do? You must bury. Ki kavor tikvarenu. That you must bury. Mikan, from here we learn out, Lamalan et meito she'over below ta'aseh. So according to this opinion, it is a Torah obligation to bury the deceased. Ika da'amri, there are those that say, there is another version. Rav Yochanan said in the name of Shem Yochai, Remez. It's not that the Torah is explicitly commanding us to bury, but rather here we have a hint, an allusion to the idea of kavura min ha-Torah, that the Torah mandates burial. Talmud lomar ki kavor tikvarenu mikan remez likvura min ha-Torah. From here we have a hint to burial, but not that it's an absolute obligation. It's not a Torah obligation, it is a remez. Now, throughout the Torah, whenever someone dies, when the Torah discusses what was done with the body, it is repeated over and over and over. What was done with the body? Burial. Abraham wanted Sarah, wanted the burial place for Sarah to be Marat HaMachpelah, what's now called the Tomb of the Patriarchs, located in the city of Hebron. Why did he want specifically that place? Tradition teaches us that he knew that that was the burial place of Adam and Chava, of Adam and Eve, and that's where Avraham and Sarah were buried, Isaac, Yitzchak, and Rivka were buried, Yaakov, Jacob, and Leah were buried, Rachel is buried in Kever Rachel, understandably called that, in the tomb of Rachel, which is on the way towards Beit Lechem. So we always hear of everyone being buried. But perhaps the greatest example is the very end of the Torah, in Devarim Lamid Gimel, Deuteronomy 33, 5 and 6. Vayamat Sham Moshe, Eved Hashem, Be'eretz Moav al Pi Hashem. And Moshe, the servant of Hashem, died there in the land of Moab by the mouth of Hashem, so to speak. Vayikbor oto vagai, and he buried him in the valley, Be'eretz Moab, in the land of Moab, Mul, across from Beit Peor. V'lo yada ish kvar oto ad hayom hazeh. No man ever knew or ever knows of Moshe's burial place until today. Right? In present-day Jordan, there is a mountain that they call Nebi Musa, which is Arabic for the prophet Moshe, where they claim that he was buried, but no one knows. No one knows. So who buried him? God buried him.
Yeah.
We learn out that the Torah begins with kindness and ends with kindness. It begins with kindness, that God clothes the naked. Adam and Eve, when they realized after they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil that they were naked and they felt embarrassed, God clothed them. And God clothes Moshe upon his death. He clothes Moshe. He buries Moshe. Right? It is clothing a person. Burial is clothing a person in the earth from where that person came. It's painful to hear when people refer to it as to put dirt onto the grave. We're not putting dirt onto the grave. What are we putting? Earth. Earth onto the grave. That's what we're doing. The person is being returned to the earth.
Isn't one of the highest mitzvahs to bury an unknown person?
Correct.
So that they're proper burial.
Correct.
They cannot thank you.
Correct. So that's actually two concepts that you're touching upon. There's a concept of a mate mitzvah. Mate mitzvah is a person who is deceased, and there's no one to tend to that person's burial.
Right.
So even a Kohen who's not allowed to deal with a dead body, a corpse, right, unless it's the closest relative, deals with that burial to make sure the person is buried. Even a Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who can't even tend to his mother or fathers or brothers or sisters or sons or daughters, will tend, and there's no one else, of course, to a mace mitzvah. Right? A Kohen Gadol who's a Nazirite, a Nazir who has a restriction against dealing with a mate, would deal with a mate mitzvah. That is correct. And another concept that we have is that anything that we do to aid in the burial of the person who has passed away is referred to as chesed shel emet, true kindness. True kindness because there is no reciprocity. Whenever a person does a kindness, so in the back of our minds, hopefully pretty far back, but in our minds there's the thought that this person owes us something. And there'll be some reciprocity at some point. But with the person who's passed away, so then there is no reciprocity. It is a chesed, an act of kindness, shel emet, of true kindness, without anything reflecting back to us.
Even Hashem buried Mitzrayim because nobody else is going to do it when they come wash up on the shore.
I'm not sure if we find that he buried them, yeah? Okay?
Yeah. So that even then.
Yeah, choliyot.
Yeah.
Could be dove. Okay? Now, God could have decided to scatter Moshe's ashes across the Yam Suf, where he led the children of Israel through, or perhaps onto Mount Sinai. No, that's not what we do. And we'll soon go into why that is, the understandings behind it. Code of Jewish law, Shulchan Aruch, teaches, Hanotein meto ba'aron v'lo kavru b'karka, if a person placed the deceased into a coffin, but did not bury into the ground, over mishum malin et hamet. So even though the person is in a coffin, but not buried in the ground, then that is the transgression of keeping the dead unburied.
Rabbi?
V'imnatnu ba'aron v'karvu b'karka, if the body was placed in a coffin and that was then placed in the ground, eina over alav, then one has not transgressed. Mikol makar, nevertheless, yafa l'karvu b'karka mamish. It is preferred to bury the person directly in the ground. Directly in the ground, not in a coffin. Now, right, even in b'chutz la'aretz, in Israel, that is what is done. I mentioned before, the body is literally laid down onto the earth. There are stones alongside the body, and then stones are placed on top. So you have 1, 2, and then a stone is placed on top, right, all along the length of the person. And that way, right, when the earth is placed in there, it doesn't fall directly onto the person, onto the stone that's above them, but the person is returned to the earth. Here in the United States, by law, I believe the person needs to be buried in a coffin, and that is allowed, as the Shulchan Aruch clearly states, and we use a simple pine coffin. Here in California, in many, or if not most of the cemeteries, they have a concrete vault that the coffin is placed inside of, and that also, we learned the last time we discussed this topic, that also is considered to be perfectly halachically legitimate, because concrete is basically earth. That's what it is. Okay? And those concrete vaults do have an opening, some openings on the bottom. Right? We typically will put some earth directly onto the coffin before they close that vault, but that's more what we do than something that must be done, because that's considered to be burial in the ground.
Rabbi,
Yes.
in Israel, I remember visiting the burial area for the young man who died on the water in the Navy, in the Israel Navy, and it's all names on marble underwater. Are they buried there?
Those were, look, that would only be if a body could not be retrieved, right? But otherwise, I imagine that was just done as a tribute to them. But any body that is retrieved is buried properly in the ground.
So then it's a memorial that they should not be.
Correct. Now, typically, the monotheistic religions bury. The non-monotheistic religions will cremate. India, that is the usual what is done. And we'll soon see some sources from the Zohar that this really speaks to the different beliefs and understandings of what is the body. From a Jewish point of view, the body is an integral partner with the soul. That we are a combination of the two. And a body without a soul would be like an animal. Now, keep in mind that an animal has what we call a living spirit, a nefesh chaya. A human being has that nefesh chaya, in addition, that living spirit, in addition to having a neshama. A neshama is a spiritual being that joins together, and us and our personalities and our loves and our dislike and our tendencies, both positive and negative, that's who we are. That's what we become from this combination of these two forces. And therefore, in and amongst the monotheistic religions, the body is treated with reverence. Right? Burning, incinerating, is what we do with trash. When we bury, we open up the ground. There's a tear in this earth. And the person is placed into the earth because there is a remembrance, and a stone is placed. Because it's not dust in the wind. All we are is dust in the wind. No. We live and we have a permanence. And there is an importance for each and every person. Now, especially for Jews, when burning has been a way of ridding the world of Jews, of giving the message that you're gone, nothing left, no remembrance, nothing left, not a trace. So the idea of cremation, of burning the body, is and should be just so contrary to who and what we are. And it's interesting how, if people would, and I imagine it's on YouTube, if you want to see what it looks like, you see just how brutal it is. And we compare that to, there's a tahara, there's a cleansing of the body, and I've taken part of a tahara, and it's incredible, just the respect and the respect that is accorded the body throughout the whole process, as it is cleaned, as it is clothed, as it is readied to be laid down, because that speaks, we'll come to it in a little while, our idea of the Tchiyat HaMeitim, of an ultimate reunification of body and soul. But it's not like in the horror movies, the zombies are... right? It is a beautiful, warm, loving reunion that takes place. But the industry, the words that they started using now by cremation are being used in order to soften what actually happens. Ashes are called cremains, or cremated remains. The crematorium grounds is now the garden of remembrance. They used to grind and pulverize the body and the bones. That's what they do. Now they process it. They used to use an oven, a cremator, or an incinerator. That's not what they use nowadays. That would be terrible. They use a chamber. They use a retort. Because they're trying to soften the brutality of what actually happens there. I mean, there's a recount over here that a Christian wrote, I am convinced that if Christians in America and Europe would stand with me beside the holy river Bagmati in Kathmandu, Nepal, and observe the burning of the body of a Hindu following the performance of the Hindu death rituals, they would cast aside in repulsion every thought of cremation being acceptable. And she goes into detail, and I'm sure on YouTube, I don't know if I can handle it, but you could see what goes on as the body is incinerated.
The Nazis really did that which was abhorrent to a Jew.
Yeah, 100%.
En masse.
100%.
Rabbi, what group or allowed even this further making a spectacle of it, of allowing a filming of cremation? I mean, that it's available on YouTube.
I'm not sure. I'm sure you could probably get what happens in Hindu all the time, in India. I'm not sure.
Oh, maybe that to have a witness that it actually occurred, that they didn't do something.
Let's hear how the Zohar describes this. This is in Hebrew. I'll translate as we go. It's on the second side of our source sheet. V'tana man da'akri lamadnu. We're learned. Mi shenikra Adam. Those who are called mankind. V'neshama yatsa mimenu. And the neshama, the soul, has left. The person has died. Asur lahalin oto b'bayit. You can't keep the body in the house. La sotolina al haaretz, to have it spend overnight on the earth. Mishum kavod aguf hazeh, out of respect to this body. Shelo yenira bo habizayon, shu guf lo neshama, that we shouldn't be seeing this degraded state of a body without a soul. Shekatuv, as the pasuk says, Adam bikar bal yalin. Shepirusho, which means Adam, a person, bikar, shuhu yakar mikol yakar, who is more precious than anything. Bal yalin should not be left out, unburied. Acha mitato, after his death. Umatam, what's the reason? Humishum shim yasukach, if one does that, nimshal kebehemot, nidmu. Because he'll be similar, be treated like animals. Ma behemot lo ayu b'chlal adam. Animals are not in the realm of mankind. Sh'al kein lo nir behem ruach kodesh. There was never a Holy Spirit in them. Afkan, so too, b'adam hamed, when a person dies, hu kabehema, he's now in that like a behema, guf below ruach, a body without that spirit. V'al kein al guf hazeh shu yakar mikol lo yanir bo b'bizayon. Therefore, we can't show it degradation, and therefore it must be buried. The Gemara, Moed Katan, Shmuel Omer, HaOmer al HaMeit B'Shat Yitzias Neshamo, Chayav L'Kroa. someone who's standing by a person when the neshama leaves is obligated to tear the garments. Lamazeh doma, to what is this compared? L'sefer Torah shenisraf, to a sefer Torah, that a person witnesses a sefer Torah being burnt, shechayav likroa, they must tear their garments. And the Ramban, one of the classic commentators, explains that li nira shanefesh beguf ka'az karot begvilin. Wow. The nefesh, the soul in the body, is compared to a sefer Torah, to a Torah scroll. And it is the letters, that's the soul, on the parchment, that is the body. Umashal ba'amal omar shehu hefsed gadol v'charada rabbah. So when there is the separation of the letters from the sefer Torah, from the parchment, it is a tremendous loss. V'chayev adam l'kro aleha, and a person must tear their garments. Ki'ilu nisrav sefer Torah lefanav, as if a sefer Torah was burned in front of that person. So, Doron Kornbluth writes very beautifully. There are different views. I mentioned before the monotheistic as opposed to the more pagan views. Right? Is the body an enemy? Is the body a trap? Give into the body, sacrifice your soul. You choose your soul by sacrificing your body. Right? So then, if that is the view, then this world contains this evil. That world, which is the physicality, that world is beautiful and spiritual, should have no physicality at all. So those views would promote cremation. Burn the body. That evilness, we can finally eradicate that evil. Judaism, and I believe in general the monotheistic religions, view the body as a partner. And it's only, physicality is challenging, but that's what allows us, those challenges is what allows us to become spiritual. Our bodies help our spiritual development. And since the body helps to earn the reward in this world, it also deserves its respect, its honor, and its place in the afterlife, in the world to come. And he writes very beautifully, the human body is the interface between the spiritual soul and the physical world. Right? The interface between the soul and the world is our physical body. The soul without the body cannot interact with the world and so cannot fulfill its task. The body without the soul is simply matter, lacking free will and spirituality. Resurrection is then simply a fancy way of saying that physicality can indeed be spiritual. Physicality, when it is measured, when it is directed, when it is within those parameters, physicality can be spiritual. And by definition, spirituality is la netzach. Spirituality is eternal. The Hebrew language is incredible in the depth and the meaning that we have in different names, different words. The Gemara in Shabbat is discussing a woman after birth. We're going to read it in English first, and then we'll read it in Hebrew. And the question is, on Yom, right, do we desecrate Shabbos for a woman who is in labor? And Marzutra recited it thus. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel Samuel, if a woman is in confinement, meaning she is, we'll soon see, as long as the uterus is open, right, which is when she goes into labor until, we'll say, 3 days afterwards, whether she says, I need it or I don't need it, we desecrate Shabbat for her. If the uterus is closed 3 days after birth, if she says, I need it, we desecrate Shabbat for her. If she does not say, I need it, we do not desecrate Shabbat for her. It all depends if the rechem, if the womb, the uterus is open. In Hebrew, listen to this. Amar Rav Yehuda Shmuel, Chaya, a woman who's giving birth. Kol zman shehakever patuach. As long as the kever is open. We're talking about the womb, the uterus. What's the Hebrew word that we use? The kever.
Rachem.
That's what we normally use. The Gemara uses which term? A kever. A grave.
Could it mean compartment this time?
Kever means grave and also means womb. Why in the world would we use the same word for a womb and for a grave?
Oh, because if it's so important to desecrate Shabbat, whatever the situation is, the womb could become a grave for the baby.
Perhaps. Any other ideas out there?
When you're buried, you're being returned to the womb is where it all started.
Okay, when you're buried, you're being returned to the womb where it all started. But let's take it a step further. A baby in the womb is there in order to be birthed, in order to come to life. And the kever, the grave, is a womb from which the person will be birthed. The person will come back to life. Interesting, I wrote over here, right above that last source we just did from Shabbat 129a, word origin for cemetery, late 14th century, from late Latin, coemeterium, or from the Greek, koimeterion, which means a sleeping place, dormitory. From koiman, to put to sleep, kemai, I lie down, ke, to lie, or to rest.
So that fits a baby.
So what do we call, in Hebrew, what do we call a cemetery? Beit HaChayim.
Final resting place.
No. Beit HaChayim is the house
of life.
of life. Beit Almin, it's also called. A house for eternity. Almin actually means worlds. A house of worlds. It's a transition. And that's why death is referred to as a gesher hachayim, a bridge of life from one existence to another existence. And the body is in the kever, is in the rechem, is in the womb, preparing, readying itself for that next stage. And therefore, right, I mentioned before the Tara, the purification process and the clothing of the body, that is to ready it for the next stage. We don't pulverize it, we don't grind it. What was the hood? We don't grind or pulverize. The body is gently laid down and covered back in the earth. There was a Rav, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Rav Ephraim Oshri, who was the rabbi of the Kovno ghetto during the Holocaust. and he fielded and responded to thousands of questions that came up during the Holocaust. The name of the sefer is Mima'amakim, from the depths. Sha'alot utshuvot Mima'amakim, questions and responsa from the depths. A Jew secretly asked the following question. We'll soon see why he secretly asked. To survive, he had disguised himself as a German. No one knew that he was a Jew. This hidden Jew was dying of cancer and will be buried in a Christian cemetery with a cross over his body, surrounded by Nazis. That's what was going to happen. He asked, perhaps I should request to be cremated to avoid this. Rav Oshri answered, absolutely not. Jews must do all they can to avoid cremation. And he lists many numerous sources backing his decision. So better to be buried in a non-Jewish cemetery with another religion's symbols, surrounded by the greatest enemies of the Jews. Better that than to be cremated. And Rav Moshe Feinstein writes rules. If a person, let's say a person was cremated, and now they want to be buried, they want to have their ashes buried in a Jewish cemetery. And he writes, that's the middle note over here, Elu shesarfu otam, those who were burnt. Right? We don't use these nice terms, cremated. Right? Those who were incinerated. Bein mitzad rishat habanim, ubein mitzad rishat atzmo. Whether it was due to the rishut, the evil of the children, or whether it was one's own risha, shetziva sishmuto, that he left. He ordered that that's what should be done with him. Ein laniach likvor ha'efer bikfurat Yisroel. We don't allow the ashes to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, amongst Kfurat Yisrael. Uvichlal efer shel meitim. This has the status of the dust of meitim. Ein tzorich lekvura, there is no need for burial, and we would not allow the burial to take place in a Jewish cemetery.
But it's done all the time.
I'm sorry, say again, Len?
It's done all the time because those Jewish cemeteries are not under the control.
Okay. Look, it's done in the cemeteries here, but it's not done in the Jewish designated areas of the Jewish cemetery. Sorry?
It's not done in the Beth Jacob.
Okay. It's not done in the Orthodox Jewish designated areas of a Jewish cemetery. Those who are in keeping with halacha, right, would not allow it. We are here for a spell, and this is a step in the process that a soul goes through, the sojourn, the journey that a soul goes through. And we need to utilize properly our time here when we are alive towards that eternity, and we need to make sure that we will be tended to properly after our demise, after our death, in order to be able to continue that sojourn, that journey. Something that I say at each and every funeral that I do, that when we tear kriya, when we tear the garment, so that symbolizes, as I mentioned earlier, that there's a tear in the earth and there's a tear in the very fabric of who we are as a result of the loss of this person. But it also speaks on a very different and a deeper level. And the body is considered to be the garment of the soul. So just like when we tear a person's garment, the body is intact. And it's just the garment that has been torn. So we tear a garment at a funeral to show our belief that it's just the garment that's been torn. The body as the garment of the soul, it's just the garment that's been torn. But the person is intact. And our belief is not only is the person intact, the person is there at the funeral. There are halachot that a person, that we shouldn't exaggerate when we are eulogizing the person. Because if we say things about that person which is not true, it's an embarrassment to the person who's there. And the heavenly tribunal is saying, well, why didn't you do all the beautiful things that they kept saying about you? Why didn't you live your life like that? Right? Better not to bring it up. To obviously find the positive aspects and speak about that so it could be something that can help inspire and set it as an example for others. But it's simply a stage, and that's what the kriya, that's what the tearing represents. Now it's become, amongst many of the non-Orthodox, they don't tear the garment, right? They either wear a black ribbon or tear a black ribbon.
Right.
So I don't. If someone wants to do that, I'm not going to run after them with a switchblade to tear their garment. But I don't participate in that. I'm not going to. If that's what they want to do, right, it's a free country. I'm not going to not do the funeral if they won't do the kriya, the mending of the garment properly. But I'm not going to lend credence to that. I'm not going to tear the ribbon. I'm not going to place the ribbon. Right? Part of the kriya process, we also make a blessing. Baruch dayan ha'emet. Blessed is the true judge. So I'll make that blessing with them. But all that we do speaks of this transition. And the whole idea that we are continuing on. And cremation is the antithesis of that. It's not the body as a partner, it's the body as the great tempter. And that's not our view. And the body deserves its respect, its honor, and it is, as we said before, there will be a continuation. And the body is prepared and readied for that, as opposed to being incinerated, burned, pulverized, ground up, etc., etc. That's not the honor that we accord a tselem Elokim, that which was, as we began, that which is in the image, in the tselem of Elokim. Okay, my friends, we'll call it over here.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Any questions, points? Yes, David.
Rabbi, then are you saying that, I don't know if the words you know, that there is a physicality in the world to come?
The world to come, in other words, the Jewish understanding is there's where the souls go in the interim, which we call Olam HaNeshamot, the world of the souls, and eventually there will be a restructuring of this world in a Gan Eden form. The body then will be on a spiritual level of what the soul is now, and the soul will be on whatever, so it'll be an incredibly spiritualized, yes, physicality. Right? Again, the way that it's described is that the physical bodies will be on the level of what the souls are on now, and then the souls will be in a completely different realm. But that is, yes, there will be a physicality. A Garden of Eden, remember, the Garden of Eden was here on this earth somewhere, right? And it was a completely different level of spirituality. So it'll be a restoration of that, and the coming of the Messiah will start that process of this ever heightening level until we reach that point of the Tchiyat Hamit.
And then when the bodies and souls are reunited, will that all be at the level of the souls or just the Gan Eden level? You know, it's very hard to...
Yeah, we don't, I don't know what these terms really truly mean. I think these are all things that we'll understand, please God, when we get there.
But not too soon.